viewers, and welcome to our program, The Business Brief, which we host once a week to unpack some of the complex issues transpiring in our economy. This afternoon, we are blessed to be hosting Mr. Denford Mtashu, the president of the Consumer Retailers of Zimbabwe, who will be assisting us to appreciate the impact of recent policy measures. I think you are aware of the levels at which inflation had reached around May 2022. And as retailers, we just thought they could come in to try and unpack to our viewers how these policies have been perceived and the impact which they are generating. Welcome, Denford.
Thank you. From the Confederation of Zimbabwe Retailers. Yeah.
Welcome, Denford. So my first question is how has been the obtaining economic environment? How has it been faring for the retail sector?
Maybe I should begin by giving a bit of a background. We were experiencing price escalations, largely driven by the parallel market exchange rate, hyperinflationary environment, and general cost of doing business. We actually faced a number of challenges, including trying to work with authorities to contain the price escalations as it impacted quite negatively on the general populace and the consumers' pockets. So there were a number of interventions that came through as a result. You remember the first was the raising of interest rates by the Reserve Bank from an average of 80% to around 200%. We also saw the fiscal authorities coming through also with a lot of work in terms of investigating their supply chain in terms of the suppliers to government, who largely a lot believed they were fueling the parallel market exchange rate from their forward pricing mechanism, of course, that was obtaining as a result of the delays by government to pay once the suppliers had supplied the goods to government. So you saw a number of them also coming up with forward pricing. So there was a lot of blame game, blame shifting, and a lot of engagement, and we were part of the major engagements that were taking place between business and government through the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, as well as business and the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. You may also remember that at one point we met with the Financial Intelligence Unit as business just to appraise each other on the obtaining situation on the ground. So it then ultimately led to the current situation after the measures were introduced. We've got a situation where there is a semblance of stability. We have seen prices of key basic commodities climbing down, and we also saw stabilization of the exchange rate, near convergence of the official exchange rate and the parallel market exchange rate. So we believe that the near stability is something that is very positive to the economy, very positive to the consumers, even though there is also a lot of work that has got to be done in order to stimulate demand.
Okay, so my next question is on the generation of US dollar sales. How have these measures impacted on retailers in as far as their improved access to foreign currency is concerned? Because I also understand that retailers are also worried about sourcing foreign currency. How is this also opened another avenue to internally generate foreign currency?
The US dollar sales have improved, but of course not to the levels that we would anticipate. Levels that would assist in sustaining the business, because the shadow market apparently has continued to grow. at a much faster rate than the formal economy. So we've got that structure of our economy that sort of shrinks the formal economy, while there is a bit of an expansion and growth on the informal economy. And many informal establishments, especially in the retail and wholesale sector, have been sprouting out, not only in the urban areas, but if you go to rural district councils, small towns, and even in the rural areas, the majority of those are not registered. So that is a structure that is got to be corrected, because the measures should actually have led to more US dollar sales for the formal businesses. But currently, most of those formal businesses are actually struggling because of the decline in Zimbabwe dollar sales. Remember, the majority of the people who would buy through the formal stores are those that earn in local Zimbabwean dollars. So what we see now is a catch-22 situation. It's actually a very, very difficult situation, an chicken and egg situation, because as of last month, when we were doing some market engagements with respective players and their supply chain, there's a huge outcry, actually, apparently, where the majority have actually gone to a point where they may begin to retrench, because the operating environment is not quite sustainable for them to be able to continue to sustain the current wage levels. So that is actually some very worrisome trend that we have seen, despite the stability that we see. Aggregate demand is actually declined, especially on basic commodities. It has actually come down by an average of 30% and more. So it's quite huge, and even general revenue generation capacity by the majority of players in the sector, it has also declined. And what we see, even the uptake of goods from the suppliers, it has also gone down. And right now, you may also remember that there are a lot of imports that are coming into the country, and the majority of the informal, the larger part of the informal trade are actually running across borders to bring in various commodities onto the market. Hence, if you walk in the high density areas, along the streets, you'll actually see a lot of people selling from the streets. You also have got a lot of illegal tuck shops that have also mushroomed in those areas, in especially highly populated areas. There has been a lot of the growth of number of places where people can access those goods and services. And in that scenario, I was speaking with a number of restaurants. They're actually complaining that a lot of people now are even selling food from their car booths. So I think that is also a phenomenon that is associated with a growth of the shadow economy, where most people, when goods are actually brought to their doorsteps, regardless of how they are procured and where they are coming from, what they simply require is easier access of those goods and services. And if they are brought to their doorsteps, whether illegally imported or illegally sourced, they still buy, because those goods are largely cheaper than those that you find in the supermarkets. Why? Because obviously the overheads are quite lower. Sometimes this is just one person who is bringing the goods and selling them off to the consumers, as opposed to a shop establishment where you've got the supermarkets by their very own nature are very high labor intensive, and also very capital intensive in terms of equipment. You need equipment for the butchery, you need equipment for the bakery, the delicatessen department, the shelving itself, and even just maintaining the shop appearance. It costs a lot of money, and you also want to protect your brand. But in doing so, you need money, you need more revenue that is coming through the sales, the till points. Till points must continue to tick all the time. But right now, I think we actually heading towards a very difficult situation for the greater part of the retail and wholesale business and its value chain.
Okay, so maybe just zeroing in on the factors that you have raised. So our challenge is emanating more from the accelerated informalization of the economy more than the economic challenges. Yes, we've got stability, we acknowledge that there's stability, but the main problem, according to retailers, is on the side of the informal sector. It's rapid growth. Is it so? Is it the case which we have here?
It's two pronged, like I
Okay.
mentioned, because the first part is that the shadow economy has continued to grow and is
Yes.
taking business from
Okay.
formal economy, and the formal economy tends to shrink in such an environment. And then the second point is that while the measures have brought joy in terms of the near stability that we see, but the downside of the measures that we've realized is the decline in aggregate demand. So why? Obviously, because there is no liquidity on the market, especially on the local dollar. There is no liquidity, and the tight liquidity situation has actually led to this scenario that I've mentioned of low sales, low revenues, constant costs, and even increasing costs, because there are some overheads that are constant, but there are some that are actually variable, and that those continue to go up, and costs naturally, whether the moment that you open the shop, it certainly means that those costs have got to be met. For example, wages and salaries. The moment that you open the store and you've got employees in the store, it certainly then means that those employees have got to be paid. And where you have got equipment, if it breaks down, it is got to be fixed. Now you add that to the issue of the load shedding that is currently quite punishing. It's in such an environment, then you've got to deploy generators, but generators are quite expensive to run. Some have actually gone solar, but solar can only do so much, and it also requires, it is high capital intensive. It is something that requires a lot of capital, especially for big establishments. If where you've got a store of more than 1,000 square meters, or a wholesale of more than 3,000 square meters, for you to power such a huge establishment, it takes in a lot of money, a money that is not available. Ordinarily, we would go and borrow from the bank.
Okay.
But after the increase in the interest rates, what we saw was a scenario where there was a lot of defaulting that took place along the value chain, because sometimes the manufacturer gives you stocks so that you sell and then you pay after 7 days or 14 days, depending on the terms of in terms of trade. But what we saw was most of the businesses, including retailers, had to rush to the banks in order to settle that which they owed to the banks before they settled with their suppliers, because of the sudden increase in the interest rate. So the rise in the interest rates was actually taken as a cost to doing business, a jump from 80% suddenly to 200%. That on its own was actually absorbed as a huge cost to doing business. So most businesses right now are actually not able to go and borrow because of that high interest regime. Ordinarily what you saw was a reaction to ensure that the borrowing for speculative purposes was ordinarily curtailed by the measures. But now what is happening is that the measure is even punishing those businesses that were actually borrowing legally in order to finance their own businesses. For example, you can go and borrow to finance stocks procurement. There's order financing where you can ask your bank to pay for certain products directly with your suppliers, and then you can generate the sales and pay back to the bank. But that is not possible right now.
Okay. Okay. So there's also, there are also some concerns that we still see some retailers charging in local currency at much higher rates than the official exchange rate, and some then try to attribute this to a cause in the decline in sales which would be experienced by these formal retailers. What's your take on that?
I think if you look at pricing right now, there has been a lot of movement in terms of price southwards,
Okay.
and for a very first time, we have seen prices moving southwards because they've always been moving northwards, and which is fundamentally a very important and good progress, especially for the consumers who are largely on the low disposable income side. So rather low income bracket side. So what we are simply saying here is that the current situation has led to prices coming down because of low disposable incomes and low aggregate demand. So effective demand apparently determines sometimes the pricing that you may see on the market. So if you find anyone increasing prices in this environment, definitely it's not possible. It's not even a convenient route because apparently customers have got a lot of options, like I indicated. There are some that are actually taking, I mean, driving around selling commodities. And when commuter omnibuses were banned at some point, a lot of people actually turned their commuter omnibuses into mobile shops. One day I was in Barre, almost each street you will see a commuter omnibus that is parked, that is selling groceries, and I think that is a phenomenon that is actually that has been growing. And for someone then to increase prices, I think that would be very detrimental to their businesses. And we are not looking at one particular brand or one particular individual shop, but we are looking at them as a collective to say, on average, at the global level, a majority of them have actually been, reducing prices in order to lure more, customer traffic into their stores.
So we've also seen some allotments on the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe foreign exchange auction going towards funding raw materials, machinery, and equipment imports. And against that background, are you also witnessing an improvement in locally manufactured goods as retailers?
Yeah, there has been huge improvement as far as local manufactured commodities is concerned. What basically is a challenge for most of the manufacturers and suppliers right now is the decimating demand. The decline in demand, contracting demand, shrinking demand is one area that most have actually complained about. And if there is a 30% decline in effective demand for basic commodities, it actually then means that the whole value chain is affected. It is not only the retailer or the wholesaler who is affected here, but the whole value chain is affected, including the manufacturer and their back-end suppliers. They are also affected because it means there is a slowdown of economic activity. So it is very, key, Alois, that at this juncture, while we are promoting stability and the convergence of the exchange rate, but there is need now to inject a little bit of liquidity so that we stimulate demand.
Okay.
It can come through salaries, it can come through bonuses, it can come through various other interventions like direct support to businesses. Because in this particular environment, you would need now to have government through the Reserve Bank and the Ministry of Finance coming up with facilities that businesses can access so that it mitigates the obtaining high cost environment against low salary, I mean low revenue and sales. So that there is need for that to happen. Why? Because uh, outside the 200% lending rates, there has got to be at least a window for especially small to medium enterprises. SMEs have got to continue to access more funding facilities for them to be able to inject into their businesses, procure raw materials. Yes, the auction system is still there. It is still doing a lot of good work. It has got to remain. It has got to continue to support the productive sector. But we are basically saying it is just the auction system, and there's need to actually come up with more broader frameworks that continue to support the businesses in the country.
So now, going back to this issue of informalization, I've noted that it's quite a huge challenge. Even when we talk about the instability in the exchange rates, all such factors are being are starting in that side of the informal economy. As the retailers, have you come up with any initiatives to try and advocate for the formalization of the economy?
Yeah, indeed, we are working with a number of the relevant ministries, the Ministry of SMEs, Ministry of Industry and Commerce, Ministry of Finance, and recently we've also started engaging with the metropolitan, state, the Ministry of state for Harare province, and we are actually working on a number of programs. Because remember, the approach has got to be creating an environment where there are more pull factors for them to be willingly or voluntarily come through and formalize their businesses, as opposed to using force. The coercive route sometimes may actually even lead to them getting deeper into the shadow economy. So what we're basically doing is to engage, and we've also even included that in our 2023 budget input, just like we did in the 2022 budget input last year. So it is a matter that we have always raised with authorities, and it is a matter that we've always engaged with authorities at various levels, because you find that even now you may have like we're having a situation where the capacity by formal businesses to even to contribute towards taxes, the fiscus through taxes, is also even declined. Why? Because of the shrinking that I spoke about, the decline in sales and the decline in effective demand. So their contribution largely now is actually affected. So you would want a scenario where instead of increasing taxes or taxation, just like we've got the 4% tax on USD, deposits, and the 2% tax on each transaction. You want to create a scenario where you expand the tax base. I mean the source base. So we want to have more players voluntarily coming through to pay their taxes to to Zimra, other than of course having more and more taxation on the fewer and shrinking formal businesses. So I think there's got to be some balancing act that has got to be carried out, that has got to be done there by government, working with the private sector, just like we've done before.
Okay, so Jennifer, do you have any, rough estimates on the growth projections for the retail sector for this ending year, which is almost coming to an end, 2022? What are your projections in terms of the performance of the retail sector?
At the beginning of the year, we were looking at, I think, more than 5%, which we reviewed to around 4.1%. But I think currently, if I'm going to say we will grow after what has happened so far, I think the momentum that was built right from the beginning of the year up to the time that we've got the obtaining situation, I think it may actually have been eaten or eroded by the obtaining situation, because so far we don't see a lot of growth taking place within the sector. Even the expansion, uh, you know, projects that a lot of local, a lot of retailers and wholesalers had partaken. We've seen a lot of them have actually stopped, momentarily waiting to see if the environment improves. You also saw, and we've got a number of big chain wholesalers that actually were on an expansion drive, but they've put those to hold because of the obtaining situation where costs have continued to pile, wages have continued to become so huge, a huge a cost to doing business, and the general viability has been quite difficult. So basically, what we see, probably if we're going to grow maybe 1%. That's basically our projection. If we really we will grow this year, probably the growth should maybe cut down to 1% instead of the 4.1% that we were anticipating. Of course, owing to the challenges that I've highlighted of slowing demand, as well as declined income levels, and the proliferation of the informal businesses across the country.
Then, coming back to this issue of imports, we see a lot of illegal imports, goods being smuggled. Recently, I was being told by some traders at Barimsiga that even tomatoes are now being smuggled into the country. How are you tackling this as retailers?
I think on tomatoes there was a time that we had shortages.
Okay.
There wasn't much that was coming out of our farms,
Okay.
and when we did a survey with Baremsika and other markets in Blue Whale, Mutare, etc., a lot had to resort to import tomatoes from some were importing from Mozambique,
Okay.
some were importing from Zambia,
Okay.
but it is not a good scenario. With the arable land that we've got as a country, surely there are some goods that we can import, not tomatoes and onions. Such products, tomatoes, onions, cabbages, potatoes, etc., those should be farmed here. We should never get to a point where we import tomatoes. Under no circumstances should an opportunity arise where we've got to import tomatoes as a country. So I believe there's got to be continued support to communal farmers for them to grow such products like through market gardening initiatives across the country, across the provinces, and ensure at least that even chicken rearing, goat rearing projects, those should go a long way in ensuring that some of these challenges that we face as a country, like a huge import bill, is cut down because we have got local initiatives. But I'm happy that the current focus by the auction system is to support importation of capital goods and raw materials. I think that is fundamentally, I mean, correct initiative that is going to continue to be supported because what we need now is more, machinery, more equipment, and of course more raw materials. But even in terms of the raw materials, there's a time that we need to get together as a country, even through the local content initiative under National Development Strategy 1, to make sure that most of the raw materials that are currently sourced from China, South Africa, etc., they are actually domesticated. So an initiative that is nationwide has got to look at or identify certain lines, certain products, certain goods that are actually continuing to draw money from the auction system through importation of raw materials.
Okay, as we round off Denford, what would be your policy suggestions to the authorities in Zimbabwe, especially monetary, fiscal authorities? What are your suggestions?
I think right now there's a need for a balancing act. Let's revive aggregate demand lest we sleepwalk into a recession or I mean a deflationary environment. So we need to continue to reactivate demand. And of course, we are looking forward for government and the private sector at least, if they can afford to pay some bonuses, and that probably could be a way of stimulating the demand that has been slowing down. But of course, the issue of the 4% tax on USD deposits that has got to be scrapped because it is causing huge anxiety amongst the business community. And probably going forward, we need to ensure that even the 2%, it could be cut to 1%, or it could be on a pro rata basis because so far, I think from our end, if we were going to increase the tax base, it means that we were going to come to a point where we may not necessarily require to continue to charge the 2% tax. And even there's also need to ensure that all the measures that we can come up with do not lead to job losses because already the economy was growing at a much faster rate. Remember, the projection was about 5% for this year. But now we've continued to, even to realign our growth projections owing to the obtaining situation. But largely, there's so much that we can do internally without even looking at the escalation of the situation in Russia, Ukraine, etc. There's so much that we can do as a country. Let's continue to power agricultural productivity, mining productivity, manufacturing productivity, and ensure that then supports the stability of our local currency. And again, we should get to a point again where our local currency should be the only currency that will be a currency of choice or a legal tender in the country because already it's being side by side with the US dollar. is one of the reasons why we saw some of those problems escalating. So at some point, I think we need to move towards a monocurrency regime as a country.
Okay, viewers, our program has come to an end, and that was Mr. Denford Mtashu, President of the Confederation of Zimbabwe Retailers. Thank you, Denford, for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. So for these and other programs, please do not hesitate to visit our platforms. Our website is www.newzimbabwe.com, our YouTube channel, Destiny TV, and our Facebook page, newzimbabwe.com. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your viewing.